Hello and welcome to Water Efficient Plants. My name is Brenda Sanders and I'm with the Department of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture in Stillwater. And I'm actually part of the Think Water group. And Think Water educates Oklahomans to responsibly use water through implementation of sustainable irrigation and landscape practices that preserve Oklahoma's limited water resources, benefiting our economy and people. And we've partnered with the City of Edmond and the Oklahoma Water Resources Board to bring you this programming. And specifically with the City of Edmond, we've partnered with their Conservation University. And Conservation University is Edmond's conservation initiative to reach residents with information regarding water conservation practices. Well, today we're going to mainly be talking about water efficient plants that require full sun, but you can find past classes online on the City of Edmond's Water Resources website and under classes. And if you click on that, you can find some of the past classes. And since today we're talking about full sun loving plants, if you're interested in plants that require more shade, you might check out one of our previous presentations called Made in the Shade. You can see over here on the left. That is a great presentation if you're looking for plants that are water efficient that require shade. So now let's get started. And getting started doesn't mean going out and buying plants right off the bat. It's important to do your homework. And time spent now is going to go a long way towards ensuring success later. And in technical terms, this step is called a site analysis. But basically what you're doing is taking inventory on what you have around your home or wherever you're trying to install plants. And the first thing that you want to do is record existing structures and features. Now, you can do this to scale it as simply as drawing it on a piece of gridded paper. And you don't have to do it to scale, but it helps later on if you do, because then you know how much room you have for plants, just by looking at it. But you don't have to. You can just sketch this out, kind of a very general sketch, but it's important to put these things on. So you would record, your home, if you had any outbuildings and things like that. Also, things like sidewalks and driveways, you're going to want to put those on that sheet of paper or on your computer. You also want to record existing plants. If you have an established landscape, you would be doing that. If you're starting from scratch, you have a new home, then you're not going to have any existing plants, most likely. You also want to mark utility lines on the map. This is important just for your reference, and also basically it's not going to negate you needing to call Okie before you plant, but it will help you as you're planning to know where those utility lines are. And also, one of the other things that you want to do is you want to identify positive and negative aspects. Are there things like, say, plants that you would like to keep? That would be a positive. Maybe you've got plants that need to be removed or pruned, and maybe they're overgrown, and these would be more on the negative side. Also, things like areas that might need to be screened from view. If you're sitting on your patio and you can see all of your neighbors' trash cans, maybe you need to plant something that can screen those. And so basically, anything like this. And also something that people don't think about is areas that you see from inside your home. Go inside, look out the window, and see if that's a view that might need to be screened or something like that. So these are things to take into consideration when you're getting ready to design your landscape. The next thing is you want to pay attention to these things when you're making your assessment. Things like sun exposure. Is it full sun, partial sun or shade? And what time of the day does it get sun? Because that makes a big difference. Also, things like wind. Does the area have good air circulation, or is it still, or is it super windy? Things like topography. Do you have low spots that tend to stay wet? Or also lower spots, if you have a large area, they tend to get spring frost. So if you were doing fruit trees or something like that, you wouldn't want to put them at the lowest point in your property, because they can be susceptible to early spring freezes. Something else you want to think about is temperature. We don't really think of this, but each yard has its own microclimate. And so there are going to be hot spots and cold spots in your yard, even with a small yard. You also want to take a look at water and drainage. Identify areas where water collects, like low spots, and areas around downspouts. And then other areas may be dry. And record any existing irrigation and note some changes that might need to be made once you've made your plantings. You also want to pay attention to soil type. Soil type greatly affects how well a soil drains, and also how well it retains water. Is your soil sandy, silty, or clay? So these are all things that you need to pay attention to, and write them down when you're making your assessment. One of the other things that you want to do is think about how you plan to use your landscape. What's your end use? Do you need areas for kids and pets to play? If so, you're going to need some large turf areas. Or are you trying to make those areas smaller? You don't need those giant turf areas anymore. Do you need areas for relaxation? Would you like to have a patio space or an outdoor room? Would you like to have a garden, a vegetable or an herb garden, or maybe a perennial or a wildflower garden? These are all things to take into consideration. Are there areas that need to be screened from view to enhance your enjoyment? We talked about that a little earlier. And remember that these areas might be the view might be seen from inside your home. And what are your long-term plans? Are you going to be adding a pool at some point? Um, If so, be sure to leave room for that, and don't put some major plantings in that area. Don't put large trees in the area that you're going to have to dig up later to have a pool. And also, you might want to think about where your trees are located. Are you going to want shade for your home for energy savings at some point? Things like that. So these are all things that you need to take into consideration, and you can put those on your site analysis. Now, once you've done this, then you can move from that and make what we call a design plan. And this is basically putting down on paper or on your computer the elements that you want to include in your landscape. It can be as large as your whole yard, or as small as a single bed. If you're just wanting to make a new bed, it's still nice to put this down on paper, because that way you can kind of see how everything fits. And basically, it's a lot easier to move things around on paper than it is to dig them up and replant them, or spend a lot of money putting plants somewhere that they're not going to succeed. So basically, you can take these things into consideration when you're making your plan. And if you make a plan ahead of time, it's going to help you have better success when you go to select plants and then also install them. Now, there are several plant characteristics that we're going to discuss shortly that can be taken into consideration when you are creating your design plan. But first, I want to talk a little bit about soil, because soil is a very, very important part of the equation for plant success. It's where the plants live. And we don't want to cover it in depth, but I just wanted to mention that it's important to get a soil sample before you start planting. And also, This information plus other information that you can get can help you know what kind of amendments, what do I need to add to the soil to help my plants grow better. And both of these things, either your soil testing information and also information on healthy garden soils, can be found at your local county extension office and also online on the Extension Service website. So basically, these are important things to think about. And not only is soil sampling good to do because it basically helps you know what nutrients are available in your soil, so you know what you need to add to help your plants thrive. And you also know that if your soil has those nutrients, you don't need to add them, which will help you save money. And it's also better because a lot of times when we add fertilizer to the soil that we don't need, it ends up basically going down the drain with our water. And another aspect that you want to take into consideration is your soil texture, and your extension service can help you figure out how to uh, determine what uh, your soil texture is, as well as doing a soil test. So anyway, I just wanted to make you aware of those resources that you have at your local county extension office. And the other thing is that if you want to know more about taking a soil sample or amending your soil, we actually do have uh, a presentation that goes into that a bit more, and that's called Step into Spring. And again, it's on the Conservation University class website. So anyway, now we're going to take a look at plant selection. But before we go through a list of plants, I want to talk about some of the factors that you take into consideration when you're selecting landscape plants. And one of the first factor that you should take into consideration is water requirements. Um, it's very important to take this into consideration because it's often the limiting factor on whether or not a plant will grow in a certain area. And especially as we try to focus more and more on water conservation, this even becomes more important. You want to choose plants that are well adapted to Oklahoma's climate. And one way to do this is to choose plants that are native to our area, like the redbud here on the left, or the Indian paintbrush here on the right. This doesn't mean that all your selections have to be native, as there are also many non-native plants that do very well in Oklahoma. They probably are native to other areas that have climates that are very similar to ours. So you can grow other plants very successfully here. But pay attention to how well adapted plants are to our climate. The other thing that you can do is to choose group plants that have similar water requirements. So a water efficient landscape doesn't mean that everything in your landscape has to do well with little to no supplemental water. It doesn't have to be all cactus and rocks, which a lot of times people think that's what a water efficient landscape is, which in truth is not actually true. If you group plants with similar water requirements, you don't have to water all the landscape as much as you would if they were scattered out. And so you can have plants that require more water if you have favorites, but just have them grouped together, and then you just have to water that area more and not your entire landscape more. Also, you need to remember that plants take time to establish, and newly planted plants will need more frequent waterings than plants, say, that have been in the ground for a couple of years. And so these are all things to take into consideration when you're thinking about water requirements. Now, our next factor to think about is mature size. And this is also extremely important when it comes to plants being water efficient. if you look here, I'll get a pointer here, but this is, here we go. This is an Atlas cedar, which is an evergreen that's very well adapted to our state, and especially the central part of the state. And you've probably seen it used a lot in landscapes because it's a good substitute for a blue spruce. And especially if you're trying to make something that looks, like it's from a mountainous area, you're using boulders, making it look natural. Cedars, Atlas cedar is a great plant to use. And you can see here on the left how we usually see it planted. We'll see it very close. Look, it's about probably maybe 2.5 feet from, this is actually a sign, but a lot of times that's the home. It's planted out about that far because when it's small and it comes out of the pot, it looks like that's enough space. All right, when we get about 15 years down the road, guess what? You can see this didn't really have enough space here. It was planted too close to the home, and now we've had to limb up this whole side. And it makes it, you can't really see how pretty this tree is because you've had to do all of these things to modify it. And basically, you probably have to fight with it for a while, and then at some point, maybe even take it out because it's too large for the space. And here on the right, I want to show you that this is actually the mature size of this tree. It's huge. I don't know if you can see here, but you can see this is a vehicle. This is the driveway. And this is a mature Atlas cedar. It's a gorgeous tree, but it's about probably 35, 40 years old. And it had enough space to go ahead and grow into maturity, and that way you can actually reap the benefits of having planted your plant with enough space. And I'm going to show here on the next slide. Again, we're looking at the cedar. You can see here on the left is a home where space requirements weren't taken into consideration. But on the right, these were planted at basically about the same time, and we're about 15 years in, and you can see how our space required was taken into consideration. Now, this is actually really important for water conservation purposes because we're trying to plant plants that are going to do well in our environment, that at some point they can probably get by without supplemental water. But this is only possible if they're allowed to grow and go ahead and grow into their space and get those great root systems going. And so see here on the left, everything's so crowded in that they're always going to be competing for water. So you're going to have to water this area a whole lot longer. And also, basically, you can't see the home. So all these plants have basically obscured your home. Whereas here, they're adding to the value of the home, and you're reaping the benefits of having appropriately sized plants that are mature, and so they don't have to be watered as often. So basically, your water requirements and your mature size are the two aspects that you need to take into consideration, really specifically for having good results with water use. Now, the next factors that we're going to look at are basically more, they don't have to do with water conservation, but they're just design aspects that you need to kind of take into consideration. And one of these elements is color. And coordinating plants based on color schemes is a really good way to add interest to your landscape. And there are 3 basic color schemes that are often used when choosing color combinations. And these include, here on the left, an analogous color combination. And this is basically, we've got our color wheel here in the middle. It's basically using colors on the color wheel that are next to each other. We see reds, oranges, kind of going all over into the yellows. This is an analogous color combination, and these colors will go together without clashing. And here you can see that actually it's on one plant. This is a lantana where this has actually been used by the plant itself, but you can also use these in landscapes. Another color combination is complementary colors, and these are colors that are actually opposite each other on the color wheel. And the thing about this plant combination, or this color combination, is that it really each color sets off the other so that this really pops in the landscape. This right here is a very common combination that you'll see in the spring of spring flowering bulbs. We see daffodils and grape hyacinths. And one of the reasons these bloom at the same time, but the other reason is that they really set each other off well. So anyway, that's complementary, and a complementary color scheme. And another color scheme is monochromatic. And basically that's using plants that all have the same hue. Now they don't necessarily all have the same bloom color, but something in each of the plants has to do with, in this case, red. And this actually can create a very peaceful appearance in the garden. It's not as busy as, say, this complementary color combination. It's more, everything is kind of blends together, and it can be very peaceful. And here we have an example of using the red color. Another popular one to use in the monochromatic scheme is to use white plants. It's very popular, and it's a really great thing to use for areas that you like, maybe around your patio or someplace where you might be in the evening, because the white flowers really pick up the light at the end of the day. And so that's a very, very nice color scheme to use. Another factor to take into consideration is form. And form is basically the shape of the plant. You can create interest by varying the form of the plants in your landscape. You see here the form of the tree on the left is columnar. It's tall and narrow, and it has a very upright growth habit. While the tree on the right here is more of a mounded form. It's short and rounded and kind of weeping. And if you use all the same form in your landscape, it's going to get kind of boring. If you think of a landscape that has what we jokingly call all green meatballs in it, short round shrubs, the landscape is, it gets kind of boring. We've got another example here of form, and I can point out how you can see this from a distance. You can see that you can see a slight difference in form and also texture, which we'll talk about next, and how it makes two trees that are basically the same size. They're both a wide canopy tree, but they look very different. The tree on the left is more open and weeping in appearance, while the tree on the right is more upright and rounded on top. You can also see a difference in leaf size, which is a variation in texture, and you can see how this creates interest even from a distance. Here we have an example of a variation in texture, which variations in texture are usually defined as coarse, medium, and fine. And here you can pretty easily see which is our fine texture and which is our coarse texture here. And you can also see how varying those can really create interest in your landscape. One of the final plant characteristics to take into consideration is season of interest. And season of interest is basically the time of year when the plant shows off. Some plants have interesting things happening during all the seasons, while others, for example, spring flowering bulbs, only have one season of interest. Even among plants that only have one season of interest, that time can vary between maybe just a few days to over a month long. And for many plants, the thing that gives them interest is their flowers. But that's not the only thing to take into consideration. Things like foliage color, also berries, seed pods, and whether a plant is evergreen or deciduous. Um, these all contribute to a plant's season of interest. And we're going to talk about that for each of the plants that we look at later. And now we're actually going to look at several of the plants that are both water efficient and good for full sun situations in Oklahoma. We're basically starting with trees, and of course Redbud, Oklahoma state tree, is well adapted to our state. It's native to our state, and especially from I-35 east. The Oklahoma cultivar is a great cultivar of the redbud because of it's got good flowers, a lot of flowers on the stems in the spring. And redbuds are a small tree. They get 20 to 30 feet tall, maybe 20 to 35 feet wide. There are some cultivars that are smaller than this and some that may be slightly larger than this. And basically it has pink to purplish blooms. The color varies a bit, and its season of interest is basically early spring. It's one of the first blooms that we see in the spring, and it's just beautiful. And again, very well adapted to our state because it's native to our state. The desert willow is a really pretty tree, and one that we probably haven't used as much as we could. It is native to our state, and it makes a nice screen. It's kind of what you might think of as kind of a see-through tree. It doesn't, it's not, you know, basically allows light to pass through, but it also covers a larger area, and it has a beautiful bloom in the summer. It gets 20 to 30 feet tall and about 15 to 25 feet wide, and it actually does not tolerate overwatering. So once it's established, it can do very well with little water. So it's a good choice for a water efficient landscape. And it's basically time to show off is in the spring, actually the later spring, kind of towards the summer is when desert willow blooms. Now moving along to some trees who it's not really a flower that makes them stand out, but their fall color. And sugar maples are one of the best trees for fall color. However, in Oklahoma, sugar maples don't tend to do well because it's too hot and dry and windy. They kind of basically burn up in the summer, except for the Caddo sugar maple, which is a cultivar of sugar maple that is native to our state. It is actually very drought tolerant because it's from Oklahoma. It's a larger tree. It gets 50 to 60 feet tall and 20 to 35 feet wide. And the downside is it can be hard to find. You have to go looking for it because not everyone carries a Caddo sugar maple. But it's worth the search because if you can get this tree in your landscape, it's gorgeous. And again, its time to show off is in its fall color. But it's a good tree to have year-round because it's a good shade tree. You can see it's very upright, straight trunk, and has nice green leaves in the summer because it is adapted to our area. So Caddo sugar maple is worth the hunt. Another maple that actually does well here is the Shantung maple. And it's nice because it's a smaller maple. So that makes it good for urban areas. A lot of times we need to find trees that will stay in the area that we plant them. and not overgrow their spot. And Shantung maple is one of those. It only gets about 20 feet tall and maybe 25 feet wide. And actually the new leaves in the spring emerge, and they'll have like reddish to purple hues, and then it will be green through the summer and then have beautiful fall color. And so we basically say this has some year-round interest for us because there's always something going on with the Shantung maple. Now, a larger tree that has year-round interest for us is the Kentucky coffee tree. It's also native, and it can get 60 to 75 feet tall and maybe 40 to 50 feet wide. And you can see here, it's got some really pretty yellow color to it. Then we have the green color through the summer. And then the female trees actually produce pods. And then you can these pods can be here through the winter. Now there are, you can buy male cultivars of this tree where you won't get the pods. So decide if you want that, if that's a bonus to you, or if you'd rather not have pods dropping off. I will tell you, while the pods create pretty cool interest over the winter, you don't want to plant them where they're going to drop on your driveway or on a sidewalk, because the seeds in these pods are really hard, and they're kind of the size of small marbles, and it can be kind of a hazard, and people can slide on these if your sidewalk's covered with these seeds. So basically, you're going to want to take into consideration if you want these pots. But if it's out in an area where you don't have a walkway or something like that, then the seeded varieties are good. And again, our interest here is pretty much year-round with the Kentucky coffee tree. And then our friend the Atlas cedar, which is a great substitute for blue spruce because it can take our hot, dry winds, gets 40 to 60 feet tall and 30 to 40 feet wide. So be sure to give it room. And because it is an evergreen, again, we have basically year-round interest from the Atlas cedar. And now we're going to move on and take a look at a few of the shrubs that are good, water efficient, full sun loving shrubs. To start with, lead plant is really, really cool. It's native to our state, and it's very, very drought tolerant. It gets 24 to 36 inches tall and about that wide. And you'll probably want to cut it back occasionally to keep it full, because otherwise it'll kind of start to be a little bit gangly. But you can see it's got great, really long purple blooms, and also the foliage is kind of a ferny foliage, and it's kind of that silver, it's got that silvery look to it. So it's a neat plant, and it's also very tough. Its time to really show off is in the summer. It blooms in the summer. Another plant that blooms a lot during the summer is blue mist spirea. It's kind of a low mounding plant, and it's neat because it attracts bees and hummingbirds to your landscape. It's about 26 inches tall and maybe a little bit wider, 36 inches wide. And the blue flowers, basically it'll keep having flushes all summer long. So it's a good shrub for some interest all summer. Whereas, you know, we talked about the redbud tree earlier, and it basically flowers and then that's it. This keeps having flushes of bloom. The chaste tree, or vitex, is another shrub that does great for us. It's also attractive to bees and other pollinators, but it's a big shrub. It's about 10 feet tall, at least, and about 15 feet wide. It's got multiple stems and it keeps getting more stems. So it just slowly gets wider and wider. And it has this great, you can see over here on the left, spike, purple spike flower. And usually it'll bloom at least 2 to maybe 3 times during the summer. And you can actually let this just grow and be a big mounded shrub, or you can limb it up and let it be like a small multi-trunk tree, or you can do like a lot of people do with their crepe myrtles and cut it back to the ground every year and let it regrow, so you have a lower mound. But however you want to use it, it's a great addition to the landscape. And again, its time to really show off is in the summer, and it's great for butterflies. You'll just see butterflies all over the place if you plant the vitex tree. The smoke tree is another shrub that is a larger shrub, and it's called smoke tree because when it blooms, the flowers look like smoke. They're just these very fine, poofy looking flowers. In fact, you wouldn't really realize that they were flowers because they just kind of look like this poof on the end of the stems, but they're really, really pretty when they're blooming. About 10 feet tall and about 10 feet wide, and there are actually smoke trees. The actual smoke tree has a green leaf, but then there are cultivars, and you see one here, that have purple leaves. So you can basically decide if you want to have a green leafed one, or you can go for the purple color and get a little bit longer interest out of it. So basically, pretty much all summer long, it's a very nice shrub. The other thing is, it again can be limbed up to be more like a small multi-trunked tree. And the other thing I wanted to point out, here in this picture, I don't know if you can see it, but you see here we've got our electric lines going overhead. And this is where these large shrubs that I'm showing you can really come in handy. If you have electric lines, you don't want to plant a tree underneath them, because over time the tree is going to get large, and then the utility company is going to come and they're either going to make you cut down the tree, or what's going to happen is they're going to slice the middle out of the tree. There's a tree over here on the other side of the street, and you've seen it happen. They come and they slice basically around the power lines, and then all you have left are these little arms sticking out at the base, and it doesn't look nice. Well, if you use a large shrub underneath power lines, you don't have to worry about this, because you can still have something that looks very tree-like, but it's not going to get up into the power lines. So just another use for these larger shrubs. Now, moving along, a shrub that is not large, it's actually very low growing, is the William Penn barberry. And it's a good shrub for if you need something that grows lower. It gets about 36 inches tall and maybe 48 inches wide. And it can be used as a nice low hedge. And a lot of times you see people plant things as hedges, you know, and that's great if you're trying to screen a view and you want it to get tall, but a lot of times our hedges get too tall. And this is nice because it doesn't get too tall. It kind of starts to spread out, and it basically is a good shrub to pick if you need something that is a little bit lower growing. It looks gorgeous through the summer. It has these nice glossy leaves and also has yellow bloom on it during the summer. So basically, William Penn is a good choice for a lower shrub. And another lower shrub is fragrant sumac. And it's different than the sumac that you see usually. We'll usually see it in the fall when it starts to turn, but fragrant sumac actually has a more rounded leaf. It doesn't have that pinnate, fringy looking leaf. It's a more rounded leaf, and it basically grows a little bit lower, and it's native to our state, and there are dwarf selections available. So it can get 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide, but you can also find selections that maybe only get about 3 feet tall. And it's also a really good plant for slopes because, one, it can kind of be used to kind of naturalize an area, and you can cover that slope and make sure that water's not running off the slope and taking all of your soil with it. This can kind of help anchor that soil on the side of the slope. And once it's established, it does very well with little supplemental water because it is native. And we basically get some year-round interest from fragrant sumac. Glossiobelia is another shrub that gives us really good, I would say, year-round interest. And on the Glossiobelia, the flowers attract pollinators and hummingbirds. And they're not as showy flowers as some of the shrubs have, but they continue to flush all summer long. So that's neat because that gives our hummingbirds and pollinators something to come back to throughout the summer. It can get 3 to 6 feet tall and about 3 to 6 feet wide. Now this varies because you can also find different cultivars that stay smaller, and you can also find cultivars that have different leaf colors. You can find them that maybe have a yellow variegation in them or some kind of bronzy color on the leaf, so that can give it more interest too. The other cool thing is Glossiobelia is what we call a semi-evergreen shrub, which means some years it will basically keep its leaves. It will stay green all winter long. If it gets really, really cold, it can lose those leaves, but don't worry, it's not dead. It will actually re-leaf in the spring. And so basically what this does is it gives us year-round interest from the Glossiobelia. Another shrub that's larger is the southern wax myrtle, and it is native to our state, down in the southeast part of the state, and it actually has kind of an olive green foliage. You can see that here, which is a little bit different than if you have everything that has the green foliage. You can see here how it really does stand out between the green in the background, and then we have this olive green in the front. It gets 10 to 15 feet tall and about 8 to 10 feet wide. And it's another one of those shrubs that can be a large shrub or a small tree if you limb it up. And it does have interest year-round, which is nice. Now we're going to take a look at some of the perennials that we have available for full sun situations and are water efficient. And Coreopsis is a native to our state, and it gets about 18 inches tall, and then it's wider, about 36 inches wide, and it blooms earlier in the summer. So that's nice if you have some spring flowering bulbs that you've planted and then have some Coreopsis that blooms a little bit after that, and then you have some of these other perennials that bloom later in the summer after that. You kind of stagger your bloom time of your plants. That's one of the things that goes into choosing your perennials that you have in your landscape. And again, its bloom time is in the summer, but more towards the early summer. Then basically yarrow is another native plant that we have, and it gets 12 to 18 inches tall. 18, I've seen them get even taller than that sometimes, depending on the cultivar, and about 36 inches wide. And there are actually many colors of yarrow available, and the foliage on them can either be green or that kind of silvery gray. And the neat thing about yarrow is even when it's not blooming, the foliage is pretty. It's got that ferny look to it. And that's kind of neat because, you know, ferns actually need more of a shady environment, and whereas yarrow will actually grow out in full sun. And so you can get that ferny effect with something that will basically take the sun. Now its bloom time is still in the summer, but it's later summer. It's not, you know, right close to spring. It's more kind of midsummer. Like basically right now, yarrow is blooming. And if you deadhead it, you'll get some more flushes of bloom. Butterfly weed is another good choice for a perennial for our area because it's native and it attracts butterflies, thus the name. And it can actually get taller, about 48 inches tall and maybe about 36 inches wide. And it also, in addition to blooming, it has interesting seed pods on it. So you get summer interest and then maybe even kind of into the fall interest on that. Now, another plant in the same family is the green antelope horn, and it is also native to our state. It gets about 18 to 30 inches tall and 12 to 24 inches wide. And the great thing about it is the host plant for monarch butterflies. And so that makes a good addition to your landscape if you like butterflies, because you're giving them a home to basically lay their eggs and then have more monarchs in your landscape. Again, its interest is in the summer. And also we have another summer blooming perennial in standing cypress, and it is native. It gets 3 to 5 feet tall and about 3 to 6 feet wide. So it takes more room than some of the other perennials that we've been talking about. And it's attractive to bees, butterflies, and birds. And you can see it has a really big scarlet spike of flowers. It's really pretty. And like I said, it's a summer bloomer. Now, ironweed is, again, another native plant that can get taller, 24 to maybe 48 inches tall and about 18 to 36 inches wide. It has this gorgeous purple bloom that attracts butterflies and other pollinators. And again, kind of midsummer is when it blooms. Now we're going to look at Russian sage, and it again is attractive to bees and other pollinators. Gets 30 to 36 inches tall and 24 plus inches wide. I've seen it get, it basically just continues to get wider and wider each year. And you may have to like dig it up and kind of divide it if you want to, which is, it's not out of control. It just takes a little bit of, you know, if it starts getting too large for your area, just dig it up, divide it, replant, and it's a great plant for your landscape. It is good for maybe the back of the border, and one, because it gets taller, and two, because it is very attractive to bees, all sorts of different types of bees. And so you may not want it, you know, if you've got a seeding area somewhere, you may not want to put that right next to your seeding area because there's going to be bees coming and going from Russian sage, which is not a bad thing, but you have to keep that in mind. It blooms in several flushes of bloom, basically from, I'd say, maybe mid-June on through frost. Then speaking of our later summer bloomers, Goldenrod is a fabulous perennial because it blooms when not a lot else is blooming in the landscape. And of course, it's native. You can see it when you drive down the road. And it is also available in varying sizes, basically anywhere from 12 inches tall up to 3-4 feet tall. And generally speaking, 30 inches by 30 inches. Basically, when you purchase Goldenrod, uh, check the label to see what the size is for the cultivar that you're getting. And the other thing that I want to point out is that it is not ragweed, because again, as you're driving down the road and you see this blooming along the side of the road and you're sneezing and your eyes are watering and they're itchy, it's actually not this plant that's making that happen. It's the ragweed that's growing right next to it that has a flower that you really can't see. You just see green leaves on it, and it's blooming at the same time as goldenrod. And so we always blame goldenrod for our allergies, but it's actually the ragweed that's giving us the allergies. Therefore, goldenrod is a great plant to put in your landscape because it's not the thing causing your allergies. And again, it blooms from kind of midsummer and on through the fall. So it's a good one to add. Blue false indigo is a really neat plant. You can see here, it looks a lot like a pea. It's in the legume family. So it actually fixes its own nitrogen. So it doesn't take a whole lot of fertilizer. And it, again, is native to our state. And there are other colors available. I just love the blue. It's actually available in a deep blue color. Actually, indigo is the color of it. It's not the indigo that we use for dye, but it's called false indigo because it has flowers that are the same color. Although there are other colors, there's yellow, kind of a pinkish color, kind of a bronzy rust color. There are several different ones to choose from. It gets basically about 36 inches tall and maybe 48 inches wide. And it also works well in the back of the flower border because it can bloom in early summer, and then it kind of serves as a backdrop to other plants. And it actually has pretty much year-round interest because in the spring when it's coming up, the foliage is neat. It's kind of a finer texture look. And then, of course, it's blooming in the summer. Then it sets seed pods, and those pods persist throughout the winter. So it's a good year-round interest. Another good year-round interest plant is rattlesnake master, and it's native. It gets about 4 to 5 feet tall and maybe 2 to 3 feet wide, and it has yucca-like foliage. And again, it gets very large, so you're going to need to give it room to grow, because that's how you're going to really see the plant shine, is if you give it room to spread out and show off. It also has year-round interest in basically it has this nice strappy foliage that's very interesting. The bloom is neat. The seed pods persist throughout the winter. So it's a great plant. It's not used that much, but it should be planted more. And then one of my favorite plants, and also a very tough plant, is red yucca. And it attracts hummingbirds. They love it because of these tubular flowers all up and down the flower stalk. It can get pretty big. The flower stalks can be up 48 inches tall, and then it at least can be 36 inches wide, probably a little bit wider than that even sometimes after it's established. It is heat and drought tolerant. So once it's established, it's not going to take a lot of supplemental water. And it also gives us year-round interest because the foliage on it, it is a yucca. It's a different species, but it's still a yucca, and it has the leaves are narrower than the standard yucca. And so it kind of, even though it is very pointy and it'll stick you, it doesn't look as coarse in the landscape as yucca does. So it's a good plant. I highly recommend it, especially for places where you're wanting to plant for water efficiency. And now we're going to take a look at a few of the annuals. And one of the things I wanted to talk about with annuals, because of course annuals are plants that we plant and they're only there for one season. And they are a very good way to take up space when you put your landscape in. We tend to plant our plants too close together. Remember that mature size I was talking about? If we take that into consideration, and we put our plants in the ground when they're new, they look like they're too sparse. And what you can do is you can plant annuals in between so that you have interest there and it doesn't look bare. And then over time, what happens is your perennials, your shrubs, and your trees get larger. They take up that space and you don't have to put in as many annuals. So they're good for that. And the other thing is, it's kind of a nice way to change up your landscape. It's like moving the furniture around. You can put something different in. I want to use a different color scheme. You can do that with annuals. And then finally, annuals are a way to add a lot more color because basically we're choosing them based on their flower color. And so the first annual that I want to talk about is Indian paintbrush, and it's a little different than some of the others. It's native, and you've probably seen it if you've driven down the interstate. This spring, it bloomed beautifully. We had enough rain to have it just really make a show. And it gets about 12 inches tall and maybe 12 inches wide. And you actually plant it from seed, it self-sows, and it's good for naturalizing. So if you have kind of an area that you're making kind of a meadow look, Indian paintbrush is a great annual to include in that mix because it does so well. Again, it's going to self-sow. It doesn't take supplemental watering most of the time. It'll make do with what it gets. Just from rainfall. And so it's a great annual for naturalizing in Oklahoma. And then moving along, a lot of these annuals that I'm going to talk about are ones that we would plant in our beds as opposed to kind of a meadow area. But Cosmos is a great annual. It's drought tolerant, it's native. It can get about 18 inches tall and maybe 24 inches wide. And the thing that you want to do with Cosmos, you don't want to over fertilize them and you don't want to over water them, because if you do that, they're not going to bloom as much and they're also going to get too tall and leggy and they're going to want to kind of fall over on you. So it's kind of neat. They don't like a whole lot of fertilizer and they don't like a whole lot of water. So Cosmos are good for a water efficient landscape. Firebush is a plant that's maybe newer that you may have just begun to see in the nurseries and the garden centers, and it's a great plant because it really likes the heat, and also it attracts hummingbirds and butterflies. It gets 30 inches tall, 36 inches wide, so it's a bigger annual. You know, a lot of times we think of annuals as getting, It's going to be 1 foot. You know, you think about planting something like impatiens, they're not that big. Well, firebush is a large annual, so it takes up a lot of real estate. And the other cool thing is that the leaves turn red in the fall. So that gives it a little bit longer season of interest. And you notice here, I'm not giving you season of interest on the annuals because basically we plant all of these in the spring. They do their thing through the summer, and then we take them out in the fall because they're annuals. Lantana is fabulous for our hot summers. It attracts butterflies, and also it can get pretty large, 24 inches tall, 36 inches wide, and it loves the heat. And there are several colors that are available. A lot of times you'll see the orange or combinations of orange and yellow. It's also available in purple and, let's see, white, pink. So there are a lot of different color combinations that you can do with lantanas. And they also lend themselves to growing in containers because, one, they love the heat, and if you grow things in containers, they're gonna be hotter than growing them in the ground. And also, it can take, you can let them get a little drier, and again, that's good for containers because you know that in Oklahoma, our containers start to dry out and we end up having to water them twice a day by the end of the summer. Now, Mexican bush sage is, it's a salvia, and it's a lot, I would say it's bigger than a lot of these other perennials that we have been looking at. And again, it attracts hummingbirds, butterflies, and bees. This is another one, like the Russian sage, that you may not want to plant right next to your seating area. And you can also see, I love the flowers on Mexican bush sage because they're this dark purple, but they're also kind of fuzzy. And so they really stand out when they bloom because of these purple fuzzy flowers. Now, again, I said it was taller, 36 inches tall, and I'd say even up to 4 feet at least, and about 48 inches wide. And sometimes this can overwinter if we have a mild winter, and also if you mulch around it, it may be able to overwinter where you can just cut it off and it'll regrow from the ground the next season. Now, yellow bells is also attracted to butterflies and hummingbirds. It's one of the larger annuals. It can get 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide easily, and it's actually a tropical plant that we use as an annual. If it were in it where it's native, it grows year round. But for us, we use it as an annual because it won't last through a freeze. But the cool thing about it is it's tropical, so it really likes the heat and it likes humidity too. So if we have a very humid summer, it's not going to come down with diseases because of the humidity, because that's what it loves. So it's a really good plant for containers. You can also use it just to plant into your landscape. It takes up a lot of room. So there are a lot of reasons why this is a great plant to add to your annuals. And the plants that we've talked about so far, they're all basically more of an upright growth habit. Some of them kind of maybe weep a little bit, but Silver Falls dichondra is something that basically just spreads. And it is a great addition to containers. You can see here how it just spills out over the lip of the container, and then it actually can run along the ground. And it has round silvery foliage. And traditionally, the annual that we would use to get this color in the landscape is Dusty Miller. But it has more of an upright growth habit, and then it's got kind of that ferny look. Well, this has a very trailing growth habit and round foliage. So it's kind of neat to have that color available with a little bit different growth habit. It only gets about 4 inches tall, and then it spreads, as you can see here, very well. And again, it's good in containers. And I just want to point out this design element of the silvery gray foliage and how well it sets off other plants. You know, we've got purple foliage here, it sets it off. We've got more green foliage, it really sets it off. It even sets off our planter. So you kind of think of this, use it kind of as a background, or, you know, the base for some of your other plants to really set them off. It's not the center of the show, but it makes the center of the show stand out. So it's a very good plant to use for containers, also kind of as a summer ground cover. So those are some of the plants that we can use in there. By no means all the plants that you can use in a water efficient landscape. Just because of time, we didn't even get into ornamental grasses, which are a great choice, but we'll have to talk about them later because they'd be a whole presentation in themselves. But I just wanted to kind of go over some of the resources that are available to you. Now, the talk that I gave today, basically the book that will really back this up is Water Efficient Landscapes for Oklahoma. And it's a guidebook that's available at the Extension Service. You can get it at your local office. You can also order it online on the Extension website. But in this book, you basically see all the different plants. Also, some of those design things that we were talking about at the beginning, those are in there, and it goes in a little bit more in depth into that. So if you're looking to put in a water efficient landscape, I would recommend getting this book because it's very, very helpful because it is written for Oklahoma. Another good resource is the Oklahoma Proven. They have a book that they've put out. They did that for their 20th anniversary. And also they have a website. So you can just go online to the Oklahoma Proven website and see plants that are selected because they have done well in Oklahoma. They've basically been proven. The plants can't make it into this book if it's brand new because we don't know, you know. There might be some brand new plant out in the trade, but if it hasn't been proven, it's not going to make it into this book until we see, that plant does very well year after year in Oklahoma. And that's how it makes it into the Oklahoma Proven. Also, on the City of Edmond website, they have a drought-tolerant plant database that you can pull up. And then you can put in the criteria that you're looking for, and it will bring up plant suggestions. So that's a good resource if you're in the Edmond area. And also the Think Water webpage is another good resource. Also, your local county extension office is always a good resource. And you can pay them a visit or visit their website or Facebook page even. And now I want to go tell you, I really would appreciate it if you could take our survey. You can either scan our code or you can go to the website here on the right and take a survey. This just really helps us it helps us with our programming because we don't want to do things that aren't helpful for you. But if you can fill out a survey for us, then that just helps us basically focus our programming into areas that you need. If you do have more questions, this is how you can get to the county cooperative extension office. There's a phone number. You can also email them. They have a website, and I really appreciate you listening today, and hopefully this helps you design your own water efficient landscape. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the survey up here at the end if you didn't get a chance to scan it or you didn't get that link to it. But again, thank you very much, and happy gardening.